December 19th, 1944. German Panther crews outside the village of Noville were reporting something impossible. American tanks were everywhere. They would appear out of the fog, fire a single shot into a Panther's flank, then vanish before the turret could turn to respond. Minutes later, the same thing would happen from a completely different direction. German intelligence reported to 2nd Panzer Division headquarters that they had encountered a full American division at Noville. They were wrong. The Americans had a handful of tank destroyers, 18-ton vehicles with paper-thin armor that couldn't survive a single hit. But the Germans couldn't hit them. The M18 Hellcat was the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II, and on that frozen morning outside Bastogne, speed was proving deadlier than armor. The German war machine had built the most feared tanks in the world. The Tiger, the Panther, monsters that could destroy Allied armor at ranges exceeding a mile. But these killing machines had a vulnerability that German engineers never solved. Their turrets depended on the main engine for power. The Tiger I used a hydraulic traverse system driven by the gearbox. At high engine RPM, the turret could complete a full rotation in about 60 seconds. But tanks don't fight at high RPM. They fight while stationary or crawling, engines at idle. At idle, that same Tiger turret could take up to 4 minutes for a full rotation. And if the hydraulics failed, the crew had to hand crank. 720 turns of the hand wheel for one full rotation. The Panther was better, but still flawed. At combat idle, traversing just 90 degrees took 15 to 20 seconds. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was a fatal flaw against the right enemy. In 1941, a lieutenant colonel named Andrew Davis Bruce took command of the tank destroyer Tactical and Firing Center. He had one job: figure out how to stop German Panzers. Bruce studied the Blitzkrieg. He analyzed every engagement where Allied tanks had faced Panzers and lost, and he reached a conclusion that contradicted everything the Army believed about armored warfare. Tank destroyers should be fast, not armored. A puncher, not a slugger. His philosophy was simple. German tanks had thick frontal armor and powerful guns. Meeting them head-on was certain death. But German tanks were slow. Their turrets were slower, and their side armor was thin. A fast vehicle could flank a Panzer before its turret could traverse, hit the side, kill the tank, disappear before the rest of the column could react. The Army thought he was insane. They built the vehicle anyway. But for the crews who would drive them, Bruce's theory was a terrifying reality. He was asking them to trade steel for speed, to bet their lives that they could move faster than the enemy could shoot. Buick Motor Division got the contract in 1942. They assigned Harley Earl's design studio to the project, the same team that would later create the tail-finned Cadillacs of the 1950s. What they built was unlike anything else in the American arsenal. The M18 weighed just 18 tons. A Panther weighed 45. A Tiger weighed 57. They achieved this by stripping the armor down to almost nothing. Frontal hull was 13 millimeters thick. The turret face was only slightly thicker at 25 millimeters. Standard infantry rifles couldn't penetrate it. Everything else could. When crews first saw the specs, they were horrified. 13 millimeters wasn't armor, it was skin. They joked that the steel was only there to keep the wind out. Inside that hull, you weren't protected. You were just hidden. The engine was a Wright R975 radial, the same aircraft engine used in the Sherman, but in a vehicle half the weight. The result was a top speed of 55 miles per hour, the fastest tracked armored fighting vehicle of World War II. They gave it a name that matched its personality, the Hellcat. The numbers told the story. At 30 miles per hour, an M18 covered 44 feet per second. In the 15 seconds a Panther needed to traverse 90 degrees, a Hellcat traveled over 600 feet. 200 yards of lateral movement. That was enough to stay ahead of the gun barrel. German gunners faced an impossible calculation. Lead the target and hope it maintained course, or track it and watch your shells land where it used to be. Either way, you were probably going to miss, and you were only going to get one shot. Because while you were traversing, that Hellcat was lining up a 76mm round on your side armor. The M18's own turret was fast, but that wasn't the real advantage. The whole vehicle could reposition faster than a German turret could turn. That was the math of survival, and at Bastogne, that math would be tested. December 1944. The Wehrmacht threw everything it had left into the Ardennes. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton. When German armor from the 2nd Panzer Division threatened the village of Noville, north of Bastogne, the 705th was sent to help hold the line. They joined Team de Sobry, a mixed force of Shermans, Hellcats, and paratroopers from the 506th. The commander was Major William de Sobry. He was 26 years old, and he was about to face an entire Panzer division. The fog was so thick that engagements happened at point-blank range. At that distance, the Hellcats' thin armor was a death sentence, but the Germans had to hit them first. Inside the Hellcats, the tension was suffocating. The M18 had an open top, no roof. The crews were exposed to freezing rain, sniper fire, and the deafening roar of battle. In the fog, every shadow looked like a tiger. The 705th developed a technique that would become legendary. A Hellcat would race to a street corner in Noville. The crew would spot a Panther through the fog, one shot into the flank, then full reverse at maximum speed. By the time the Panther's turret traversed to return fire, the Hellcat was already gone. Behind a building, down an alley, repositioning for the next shot. Moments later, the same Hellcat would appear on the opposite side of the German column. Another shot. Another kill. Another disappearance. The Germans couldn't track them. Every time they turned to engage one threat, another appeared somewhere else. Reports to 2nd Panzer Division headquarters grew increasingly alarmed. They were being hit from all sides by what they estimated was a full American armored division. They were fighting a single reinforced battalion, a 26-year-old major, and a handful of tank destroyers with fast feet. Speed couldn't save everyone. With only 13 millimeters of steel, any hit was usually fatal. German 75mm rounds went through both sides of the hull. Crews who got caught in the open died. Those who misjudged their timing died. And those who simply got unlucky faced a gruesome reality. The M18's open turret meant that an artillery airburst or a mortar round didn't need a direct hit to be lethal. Shrapnel rained down directly onto the men inside. It was a fast ride. But it was a cold, open grave if you stopped moving. Colonel Templeton drove his men hard because he knew the alternative was worse. Static defense meant death. Movement meant survival. Over December 19th and 20th, Team de Sobry and the 705th destroyed over 30 German tanks around Noville. The village eventually fell. The American force was too small to hold against the full weight of the 2nd Panzer Division. But they had bought time. Critical hours for the 101st Airborne to establish the defensive perimeter that would hold Bastogne. Templeton survived the bulge. He kept commanding the 705th through the drive into Germany. On March 1st, 1945, An artillery shell struck his command post. He never saw the victory his tactics helped achieve. 4 months later, a different Hellcat battalion would prove the math in a completely different way. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion was the only unit in Italy fully equipped with M18s. Their commander was Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler. The crews painted unauthorized black cat logos on their turrets, a cartoon cat biting a tank on an orange disc. Command told them to remove the markings. They didn't. It was a small act of rebellion, but it mattered. They were driving the most fragile vehicles in the theater. That cat logo was their way of baring their teeth. If they were going to die in these things, they were going to do it with their own identity. In April 1945, the Allies launched their final offensive in Italy. After months of grinding through the Apennine Mountains, the Po Valley stretched ahead like a billiard table. German forces were retreating. Columns of trucks, half-tracks, and tanks streaming north toward the Alps. The soldiers called what happened next the rat race. The Po Valley was perfect Hellcat country. Flat, open. No hedgerows or forests to slow them down. The 805th crews found themselves driving parallel to retreating German columns. Not behind them, beside them. At 30 miles per hour, they would pull alongside and open fire. The 76mm guns raking trucks, half-tracks, and tanks from the flank. German gunners frantically cranked their turrets, but the geometry was hopeless. By the time a gun came around, the Hellcat that fired had already moved 200 yards down the column. It was a drive-by shooting at armored vehicle scale. And because the 805th was the only Hellcat battalion in the entire theater, German intelligence was baffled. A black cat spotted outside Bologna in the morning would be reported 50 miles north by afternoon. The pursuit moved so fast that crews couldn't guard the prisoners they captured. They just disarmed the Germans and pointed them to the rear. Then they kept moving. The adrenaline was constant. Crews later recalled the surreal nature of the chase, speeding past enemy infantry who were too stunned to fire, the wind whipping through the open turret, the feeling of being in a hunt rather than a battle. By the end of the war, M18 Hellcats had compiled the highest kill ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer. 526 confirmed kills. The overall exchange ratio was roughly 2.4 to 1. Better than the Sherman, rivaling the heavy-hitting M10, better than anything else the Americans fielded.